The signal came from nowhere. A single pulse, then 1,000 more. Every monitoring station across the Orion sector lit up at once, frequencies that hadn't been active in over a century. The Galactic Assembly had declared Earth a dead world. They divided its territories, settled its colonies, erased its name from every star chart. But the signal didn't care about their declarations. It was loud, it was clear, and it was not asking for permission. For 100 years, the Sol system had been a void, a dead zone wrapped in silence, so complete that even light seemed reluctant to leave it. It started without warning. One day, Earth simply stopped responding. Every transmission went unanswered. Every probe sent toward the system vanished without a trace. And then came the barrier, a wall of energy unlike anything the galaxy had ever recorded. It wrapped around the entire solar system like a cocoon, impenetrable, unreadable, absolute. The Galactic Assembly sent its finest scientists. They sent warships. They sent diplomats broadcasting on every known frequency. Nothing got through. Nothing came back. After 30 years of silence, the Assembly voted. Earth was declared extinct. Humanity, the youngest species ever admitted to galactic civilization, was gone. And the galaxy barely flinched. To understand why nobody mourned, you need to understand what humanity was before the silence. They were newcomers, the youngest species in the Assembly by almost 10,000 years. Their technology was borrowed, their fleet was small, and their homeworld, Earth, was a pale blue speck on the fringe of civilized space. The galaxy had over 400 spacefaring species, empires that had existed for millennia. The Dreylift Dominion controlled 17 star systems with fleets that could darken a sun. The Veilori Collective had perfected genetic engineering so thoroughly that disease was a myth in their space. The Thessary Union had built Dyson spheres before humanity had discovered fire. Against all of them, humanity was nothing. They had no empire, no ancient technology, no biological advantages. They were loud, chaotic, and stubbornly independent, qualities the Assembly tolerated but never respected. Humanity had been granted 4 colony worlds. 4, a token gesture from the Assembly, given to keep the young species busy and out of the way. The colonies were on the edges of mapped space, worlds nobody else wanted. Cold worlds, harsh worlds, the kind of real estate you give to a species you don't expect to last. And humanity took them. They took those frozen rocks and barren deserts and they built. Not elegantly, not efficiently, but relentlessly. Dome cities on airless moons, hydroponic farms carved into cliff faces, orbital stations held together with ingenuity and stubbornness. The galaxy watched with mild amusement, the way you'd watch a child stacking blocks. Then came the silence, and the blocks stopped moving. Within a decade, the Dreylift Dominion had claimed 2 of humanity's 4 colonies. The Veilori took a third. The fourth, a frozen world called Anchorage, was simply abandoned, left to decay. Nobody protested. There were no allies to speak on humanity's behalf, no treaties strong enough to protect a dead species' territory. The Assembly's position was simple. Resources should not go to waste. Human artifacts were cataloged. Their history was archived in the lesser data vaults, not important enough for the primary records. Their music, their literature, their art, filed under extinct primitive cultures. A century passed. The galaxy forgot the taste of human coffee, forgot the sound of human laughter, forgot that a species had once looked up at the stars with so much hunger it frightened older civilizations. They forgot. That was their first mistake. The barrier fell on a Tuesday. No one in the galaxy measured time that way anymore, but somewhere in the data, that detail survived. A human detail, small, stubborn, persistent. One moment, the energy field was there, an impenetrable wall that had humiliated the greatest minds in the galaxy for a century. The next, it simply wasn't. And in its absence, the Sol system screamed to life.
Not a whisper, not a tentative hello. The electromagnetic output from Earth's solar system registered on sensors halfway across the galaxy. It was like someone had turned on a second sun. The first readings were dismissed as instrument errors. They had to be, because what the sensors were showing was impossible. The energy signatures coming from Sol didn't match any known technology. Not Drelith plasma drives, not Valoride biotech, not even Thessery quantum architecture. It was something else entirely, something new, something that shouldn't exist. Ambassador Cale Theron of the Valori Collective was the first senior official to respond. He ordered a long-range scan of the Sol system's interior. The results arrived 4 hours later. His aide found him standing at his office viewport, staring at the data tablet with both hands trembling. "Ambassador?" His voice was barely a whisper. "There are structures around Jupiter." "Structures, sir?" "Megastructures, orbital rings, energy collectors the size of continents." He turned to his aide, and for the first time in recorded history, a Valori diplomat looked afraid. "Mars has an atmosphere." The aide blinked. Mars was a dead rock." "It was. 100 years ago, it was." He set the tablet down. "They terraformed a planet in a century. We haven't been able to do that in 10,000 years." The Assembly convened an emergency session within 6 hours. 400 species, every ambassador, every delegate, every military advisor who could reach the capital in time. The question was simple: what happened inside that barrier? The theories were endless: outside intervention, AI singularity, dimensional breach. Every explanation was more terrifying than the last, because every explanation meant the same thing. Humanity hadn't died inside that barrier. It had changed. Fleet Admiral Draxon of the Drelith Dominion was the first to address the military implications. He stood before the Assembly, his armored frame casting a long shadow across the chamber floor. "We need to establish contact immediately, on our terms." "And if they're hostile?" someone asked from the back. Draxon's jaw tightened. "Then we need to know what we're facing before they decide to show us." But the galaxy didn't get to decide the timeline, because 2 days after the barrier fell, the first ships emerged from the Sol system. Long-range sensors picked them up at the edge of human space, a fleet, moving fast, moving in perfect formation, and moving with a confidence that made every tactical analyst in the Assembly lose sleep. There were over 300 vessels. The smallest was twice the size of a Drelith dreadnought. They moved without engine trails, no plasma burns, no radiation signatures. They simply moved, as if space itself was carrying them forward. And they were heading straight for Anchorage, the frozen colony, the one humanity had built on a world nobody wanted, the one the galaxy had abandoned and left to rot for 100 years. The Drelith had no military presence at Anchorage. Why would they? It was a graveyard, a frozen monument to a species that no longer existed. The only occupants were a small Drelith mining operation, extracting rare minerals from the planet's crust. When the human fleet entered the system, the mining crew did the only thing they could. They sent a distress signal, and they waited to die. The fleet arrived in Anchorage's orbit in under an hour. 300 warships arranged themselves around the planet in a formation so precise it looked choreographed, geometric, beautiful.
Terrifying. For 11 minutes, nothing happened. The miners sat in their prefab shelters, watching their instruments, breathing recycled air that tasted like fear. 11 minutes of absolute silence from a fleet that could have reduced the planet to glass in seconds. Then a transmission came through. Not on Drelith frequencies, not on Assembly standard channels, on an old human frequency, one that hadn't been used in 100 years. A voice. Calm, clear, human.
This is Commander Idris Voss of the Reclamation Fleet, speaking on behalf of the unified Terran sovereignty. We are aware of the Dralith mining operation on the surface of Anchorage. You have 72 hours to evacuate all personnel and equipment. No harm will come to you. This is not a threat, this is a courtesy. A pause. Anchorage is ours. It has always been ours. We're taking it back. The message hit the assembly like a shockwave, not because of what it said, but because of what it meant. Humanity wasn't asking for negotiations. They weren't requesting arbitration. They weren't petitioning for their colonies to be returned through diplomatic channels. They were simply taking them. Fleet Admiral Drexen mobilized the Dralith Third Armada, 800 warships, the pride of the Dominion, and ordered them to Anchorage at maximum speed. "They want to play games with deadlines," he growled to his war council. "They'll find out what happens when you challenge the Dominion." The Third Armada would arrive at Anchorage in 6 days, but the galaxy didn't have 6 days. Because 48 hours after the Anchorage transmission, a second human fleet appeared, this one at the edge of Valori space. Same formation, same silence, same impossible ships. 400 vessels this time, heading straight for the second stolen colony. Then a third fleet at the border of Thessary territory, where the third colony had been. 3 fleets, 3 directions, simultaneously. The Assembly had spent a century believing humanity was dead. In the span of 4 days, 3 separate armadas had materialized across galactic space, each one larger and more advanced than anything the galaxy's greatest empires could field. And they were just getting started. Ambassador Thyron stood before the emergency assembly session, his hands no longer trembling. They had gone still, the way hands go still when the body has moved past fear into something deeper. "We need to understand something," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos of 400 panicking delegations. "We sealed them inside that barrier. We assumed they would die. We divided their worlds. We archived their culture in our least important databases." He let the silence hang. "We treated them as though they were already extinct, and while we were cataloging their bones, they were building something we cannot even comprehend." A Thessary delegate stood. "What are you proposing?" "I'm proposing that we stop pretending this is a negotiation. Every hour we receive new data from the Sol system, structures we can't identify, energy readings that break our models, a population count that—" He stopped, swallowed. "What about the population count?" Thyron looked across the chamber, 400 species staring back at him, the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy hanging on his next word. Before the silence, Earth had 8 billion inhabitants. And now, our long-range biosensors are still calibrating. The numbers keep climbing, but the current estimate— He closed his eyes. "The current estimate is 97 billion. The chamber erupted. 97 billion in a single star system. A species that had numbered 8 billion before the barrier had grown 12-fold in a century. They hadn't just survived behind that wall.
They had multiplied. They had industrialized their entire solar system, terraformed worlds, built megastructures, developed technology that defied known physics. And they had done it all in silence, in darkness, without anyone watching. The galaxy had given them 100 years of solitude and assumed it was a death sentence. It wasn't a death sentence. It was a head start. On Anchorage, the Dralith miners packed their equipment. They didn't wait 72 hours. They didn't wait 48. They loaded their transports and left within 16 hours of receiving the message.
The foreman, a grizzled Dreyliff veteran who had fought in 3 border wars, was asked by this crew why they weren't waiting for the Third Armada. He looked out the viewport at the fleet overhead. 300 ships, motionless, patient, glowing faintly against the dark. "Because I've fought enemies before," he said quietly. "Enemies who threaten, enemies who bluff, enemies who posture." He sealed the airlock and initiated the launch sequence. "That fleet isn't doing any of those things. They told us exactly what they're going to do, calmly, politely, and that terrifies me more than any weapon ever could." The transport lifted off Anchorage's surface, leaving behind a century of silence, a frozen world, and the unmistakable feeling that the galaxy had just woken something it did not understand. And deep in the halls of the Galactic Assembly, as the delegation scrambled and the admirals plotted, a single data packet arrived from the Sol system, unprompted, unencrypted, sent on every frequency simultaneously. It contained one line: "We remember everything." The Third Armada was still 4 days from Anchorage. Humanity was already there, and they were not done. Humanity actual, not a myth, not a legend, the real thing.